there is an art to sharing in a way that resonates. There is an art to sharing in a way that comes across as authentic. There is an art to all of it. There's an art to living.
Lady Balls Radio, a celebration of women bold enough to live their truth and inspiration for others to do the same. Welcome back, Lady Ballers, and welcome back, Justine. Oh my gosh, part 2. If you missed part 1, well, I guess you don't rewind, but you can definitely check it out. Either subscribe on iTunes at Lady Balls Radio, or it's at ladyballsradio.com. So I'm going to give another quick introduction to our guest today. Justine Malick is an LA-based yoga and Pilates instructor. She was a competitive figure skater for 10 years and found a love for yoga as she transitioned out of that life. She has several certifications, including those from YogaWorks, Bossy Pilates, and Embodied Flow. She's also been trained in resistance, flexibility, strength training, and deep bodywork massage. Through her yoga classes, she strives to create a safe and playful environment for students to explore mind-body connection, as well as develop a keener sense of awareness both on and off the mat. And like I was saying last time, on a personal note, I am a frequent student of Justine's classes, and she is magical. We are like, she's seriously the flow whisperer. That's my new title for you.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you for having me back for part 2.
Yeah, no, welcome back. So today I promise we will be discussing, hitting on several topics, but we're really going to be talking about whole body awareness, how that applies to our yoga practice, really in any other movement. We're also going to be talking quite a bit about yoga and social media, because Justine is also, she's an expert in that field. She's actually the social media editor at Wanderlust Hollywood. So we're going to be breaking down a little bit. You know, there's a lot of buzz about yoga selfies and talk about it. Maybe you love them, maybe you hate them. But there's really a lot of layers behind those quick snippets that we see on social media. So it's not so easy just to judge right off the bat, because there's a lot behind that. So we're going to be getting into a really good juicy discussion about yoga and how it's portrayed in social media and some things to consider there. But and just to recap quickly, part 1, originally this was supposed to be the show, what I just talked about. But we got into such a fabulous discussion about Justine's story, really fleshed out what happened after those 10 years as a figure skater and where she went from there and how her yoga career blossomed. And we got into such a fabulous discussion about tapping into our intuition, trusting ourselves, how we can do more of that, how we can more consistently be in a flow state. So guys, seriously, if you already heard, episode 1 with her, you know how great it is. If you haven't, I really urge you to go back. I can't imagine anyone that couldn't benefit from having more flow in their lives. So even though we ended up getting off track from what we were intentionally originally going to be talking about in that episode, it's all good because it was just such fabulous stuff. Inspiring, helpful. You're welcome. So so you told your story so well there. So we'll
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We will fast forward through that. Because it's so great and it's there. And if you're looking at the show notes for this show, I'll link to that episode directly so people can circle back to it.
Great.
But so welcome officially again, part 2. Thank you for graciously giving your time and your gifts. So let's dive in. Let's start talking about, one of the things that is one of your specialties as a yoga instructor is talking about the layers of the body and incorporating that into your vinyasa sequences. And more specifically, I know we could do a whole show on meridians, and it's very complex subject, but can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, there are, and this is like science now, right? Like, not that it hasn't always been, but we have these real energy channels in our body that are connected. It's not just like, oh, I need to open
Right.
my heart, or I need to, stretch my arms, or my hamstrings are
Right.
tight.
Right.
So just, I guess, like Meridian 101, if
Okay.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
possible.
So, I was introduced to this work, maybe 4 years ago, and it completely changed my understanding of the body and how I approach movement. And it just added in this whole, like you're saying, a whole new layer. And the specific field, like the specific modality, is resistance, flexibility, strength training. And it was created by this man named Bob Cooley, who was based in Boston. And he was invited to Santa Barbara by the studio owner, Eddie, who's the owner from the studio that I used to teach at Yoga Soup. And it ended up blossoming into this big thing. And a lot of us in Santa Barbara, a lot of yoga teachers were really taken by this work and really dove into it all together. But essentially there are 16 meridians that he works with. And in traditional Chinese medicine, there are 12. So there are 4 additional ones that he says he basically has discovered. And he has an interesting story. He was in this terrible car accident and rehabbed his body through this work. And it basically breaks up these 16 meridians into 4 worlds. And there's 4 meridians in each world. And those worlds are the physical world, the psychological, mental, analytical world, the emotional world, and then the spiritual world. And we all, as humans, have all 4 of these worlds within us. And so within each of these worlds are there these 4 meridians that can be, isolated and focused on. And so I really enjoyed learning what they are, and I've received acupuncture before, and I've always been so interested in it because my very first time receiving acupuncture, I was really nervous about the needles. I didn't know if it was going to hurt, and I didn't really understand what it was. And Bill, this acupuncturist, explained it and so beautifully that I've, thought back to this moment many times, that basically that in Chinese medicine and Eastern practices, there is sometimes you will feel something, there will be an effect of putting the needles in, which essentially are clearing blockages of energy, which is a pretty esoteric concept if we're used to being in a very scientific Western world of what does that even mean? What do you mean clearing blockages of energy? But within the context of Chinese medicine and Eastern practices, there's an acceptance that sometimes you will not be able to explain what is happening. Sometimes you will feel something, you'll feel more calm, or you're less stressed, or you'll start sleeping better, or you'll walk away from an acupuncture session feeling good in some way, and you cannot explain why. And that's okay. That there's this okay, I don't know why I feel better, but I do. And so letting that alone, whether you have the explanation, the reasoning, the analysis of it or not, whether can we define why it is that I feel better? And it's nope, I can't, but that's okay.
But you do, so that's
I do.
Real.
And so that feels real, right? And so once there's this, it's an acceptance, there's a trust there to a certain extent, but there has to be an openness, right, to exploring these different things. And so for me, when I started learning about these meridians, we explore them through the physical world. We all live in physical bodies. And so we get to move our bodies and stretch. And so Bob would lead these workshops, and he had other people that were teachers in this work as well that were there. And we would feel them, they're you're not going to, know what we're talking about until you feel this yourself. I can't just tell you that the large intestine meridian runs from your index finger all the way up the back of your arm to your neck until you feel it. And so we do these kind of things. And a lot of the movements would resemble yoga poses, but they're a little bit more dynamic, and they include more repetitive, resistance movements. but that example, like that large intestine is the meridian that would be in eagle arms. So just putting your arms in eagle arms and like moving your elbows up and down and pushing your hands into one another, you can get this really great massage for the backs of your shoulders. You can release tension in your neck, but it's also good for your digestion, or or one that I really like teaching a lot, which you've been in class for, is the stomach meridian. It starts in the big toe, goes up the front of the leg, up the front of the quad, all the way through the chest and all the way to the jaw. So we're releasing tension in our quads. We're releasing tension in our in our jaw. And it's this really interesting relationship. And so that's, again, what it is, speaking to relationship of how do these different pieces of myself relate to one another? How does moving physically, how does like changing through these different stretches affect me spiritually? Like, how do I feel more open? Can I listen better when someone's speaking? Am I not so frantic? All of these different things can be affected through movement or meditation or whatever. But this is obviously like a very physical way of approaching these things, but it would speak to all these different things, these different worlds, whether it's spiritual, emotional, or analytical, all of these things. And it was pretty fascinating to me at the time. It just revolutionized my way of understanding the body. And so my true, love when it comes to movement is the blend. I love the blend of all these different practices. I don't really believe that you have to do just one. And I don't really think that there is any one movement practice that is all encompassing. I think yoga asana is relatively new. I mean, like, yoga itself has existed for a really long time as a practice, but asana is very westernized. And so that's why it's good to constantly keep going to class and learning new things and changing the way you're moving. So you're not just in a rut, but also you might be like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. In Warrior One, I now just feel something super different through my hip or my heel or whatever it is. It's good to keep doing things differently and just trying it on and seeing, like, how does this feel? How is this serving me? How does my shoulder feel now? How does my, all of these things. And so I started really slowly, gradually integrating the concepts into my teaching. And now it's still not something that I just like focus on the entire class, but I do try to integrate them in the sequencing process. Like when I'm writing out the classes and creating them, I'm definitely aware of, what I'm bringing in. And sometimes it's more than others. Like, I've taken a class that is fully focused on the spleen, and which is a very nurturing, nourishing meridian when we need that the most, and so seasonally it's nice to play with different meridians. When I first got back to Melbourne, I taught this workshop up at Yoga Soup all about transitions, and it was on the spring equinox. Oh. And so we're transitioning, from season to season and like into spring. So that's already a big thing. So there's different things that we can eat Ayurvedically that is really good, but also like liver and gallbladder can really be a focus. And so we did a whole sequence that used a lot of different movements that engaged with these meridians. And so that was a really fun thing for me. And I just think it's fascinating to see and explore the body in this way. And so that's where the true, desire to keep moving in that way, in that direction, I guess originally stemmed from, or that's why I keep like going down these different rabbit holes, whether it's through the resistance stretching or if it's going to more acupuncture or taking a new teacher's class or something like that. It's really nice to see what people are weaving in. Yeah. Tantra as a philosophy, tantric philosophy, Kashmir Shaivism, we talk about it in the embodied flow training that I'm in as tantra meaning weaving. And it is this weaving together of all these different philosophies, and we can all kind of pull from what we study and bring them in, so that our movement practice, our meditation practice, is this really beautiful accumulation of all of our pieces of ourself. And then of the collective group. So like I'm bringing what I know to a group, but someone else might interpret my cues very differently. And that's great. I think we can all be affected in different ways. Like I might feel the release in jaw tension from the quad stretch, right? But someone might not. They might feel less. So quad, which is the stomach line, is also helpful for removing exhaustion from the body, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So someone else might feel that more, or they might not feel any of it. And that's okay too. They might just get a quad stretch and feel good.
Right.
And that's fine, and then when they get to the bladder line or kidney balance and they start working with these two, that might be really strong for them. And that's cool, and then you and I have talked about this, how like none of this is real until it's real for you. And so that's where this exploration can, be really powerful. At first it can be just really simple, just physical. And then the more we start getting to know ourselves, the more we start exploring either the teachings of others or the teachings of Chinese medicine or all of these different teachings that exist, or just self-practice of just self-exploration of like, oh, when I sit with my legs in a wide straddle, and just sit here for a while, this is what I feel. And so I had this moment when someone in the embodied flow training, one of the teachers said, well, how do you think the meridians in Chinese medicine were discovered? And I was like, what? I was like, I know where they are. Like I learned where they are. This is where they told me, and I can feel it. I feel when I do this stretch with my inner thighs, I feel my liver meridian. And it was like, I said it with, like I felt like I knew what I was talking about. And then, but when he said that, Scott, the teacher said that, I was like, what do you mean? How were they discovered? Right. And he goes, well, someone felt them.
Yeah. That's it's
a big thing. Someone was that attuned that they did something with this meridian and felt it in this organ. And it's like, what? We are not, as a whole collective, whatever, we are not living with that level of attunement, I think is fair to say. And so but that's possible. Like that exists as humans. That is a possibility for us to get that in touch with what's happening within ourselves. And so that to me is really intriguing. And so through my classes, if I can give someone just a hint of that, I think that's really beautiful. And through my own practice, if I can get just a little bit of that, I feel like that's something, that's a big something.
Yeah, that's a huge something. So what would you recommend? I mean, obviously, if somebody is here in Los Angeles or even just passing through, like take one of Justine's classes, please, at Wanderlust. I mean, not please, I'm begging for you. No, you will be so happy you did, and you can experience what she's talking about firsthand. But what about somebody who that's not a possibility for? What kind of advice would you give? Because this is a big topic, right? And there's a lot going on. And for somebody like we were talking about earlier, who's not used to this, or maybe this is an entirely new concept to them, it's a little overwhelming. Like, oh my gosh, 16, totally. How many, 4, where does this go? My toes connected to my hamstring. No.
Exactly.
But what would you recommend for them to start being more aware in their asana practice? Because a lot of times, let's face it, and especially here in LA, it might be more physical, right? Like just like this is my workout today, and it's this.
And that's great,
Totally. But how do we incorporate the mind into it without getting overwhelmed into like, wait, what was connected to what? But just to start having that mind-body connection.
Right. I think it has to start small. And that's like the biggest thing is like recognizing that for me to get, if we're thinking of me as this example, to get to this point has taken years and years and years. Yeah. Right. So this is not something that happened quickly. And it's so much time I, devote to just studying this stuff and moving around on the floor on my yoga mat and going to class. And it's a lot of time and it's a lot of practice. And so, but then also like knowing that we have to start somewhere. So it's not this thing to be like so intimidated by like, oh my God, I have to like study this stuff for 10 years before I even get to understand a little bit. It's like, no. If we start small, we can slowly, take these little digestible bites that we can process. And so yin as a practice, yin yoga, is a Chinese practice. It's not a Hindu lineage. It's Chinese. And so if you go to a yin class, which is available almost anywhere, those are working with the meridians too, in a much more soft, restorative way, but still working with the meridians. And so that's one piece. I mean, there's so many books that I could recommend, but The Genius of Flexibility is Bob Cooley's book. And so that speaks to this work specifically that I've studied, which is really interesting. But going to class is such a beautiful thing. I think being in a room of people that are moving and breathing together is really special and really an energetic thing that we can't recreate necessarily on our own. But also there's so much online. I mean, we're so lucky that there's so much available to us. So, I mean, my teachers, like Tara Jadel is one of them, and she teaches yoga on Yoga Glow.
Right.
And that's so cool. Like that exists, that someone can go be in their living room and get the experience of a class, because it's virtual to a certain extent, right? You're just in your living room, but there is definitely the experience, at least part of the experience of being in a class. And so that's really special. I think so approaching these things with the intention of wanting a, more attuned body-mind connection is like the best thing possible. The biggest thing to getting there, like the most important thing to getting where you want to go is setting that intention. So that in and of itself will have an impact.
Yeah. So just being more mindful at the beginning of class, whether that class is in your living room or
right. And just like before you even start moving and set your intention. I went to class this past weekend with Dana Reiser at Wanderlust, and she said, I loved how she said that. She was talking about when we come to class, we work our muscles, right? We work our physical muscles, but what about our muscle of focus, our muscle of attention, our muscle of compassion? And it's like, maybe you've been sitting in your desk all day, so you actually are just here. That's your intention to move your physical muscles. And it's like, that's beautiful. Good. We need movement, right? We want that flow. We want all of it. And so, but maybe you're here to do that and to practice using your muscle of attention. And it's like, the idea is it's a practice. So we're practicing it here. And so when we get off the mat, we're practicing, we have a stronger muscle of attention so that when we're in conversation with someone, we can have a good attention.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so simply put and so wonderfully put. It was just, it doesn't need to be something fancy. You don't need to weave in some really intricate sequence. You don't need to weave in a really, esoteric philosophy, sutra or something like that for it to be a good practice or to be like advanced. I really shy away from language like that. Whether I'm teaching a level 1 class or a level 3 class, those things don't really have much meaning to me.
Right.
And so, I guess, it's really interesting. I think to just setting an intention can speak volumes, and it can have such an impact.
Totally. So we don't need to know like the entire Patanjali, like have our little pocket Patanjali with us. And like, hey,
but if that's your thing and if that turns you on, like dive in and go for it. Right. Yeah. And so, but there's so many different directions that you can take your practice that you have to figure out what is speaking to you. What is having an impact on your life, both on your mat, off your mat, all of it. I believe that there is something, like some way of practicing for everyone. There's plenty of people who will be like, oh, no, yoga is not for me. It's like, okay, cool. Have you like tried one core power class or, or maybe like even the class that I teach is like not for people. That's cool too. I'm not the person for everyone. And so, and that's fine. Yeah. But there is something out there that people can, like, we all are in these physical bodies and they like to move.
Right.
So there will be a form of movement that feels good. You
Right.
just got to keep trying until you find it.
Just keep, yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I mean, I'm even thinking of the lineup at Wanderlust with, like Donovan's uh,
Totally.
class on Thursday nights where you're just like letting loose and dancing, but then you're also doing
Yeah.
yoga flow and just so, and like all the yin classes and all the different
And all
teachers.
of these
So,
classes are interpreting similar things in different ways. And
right,
so, it's in a lot of ways, it's like figuring out, it's like learning new languages. And so some languages are really understandable and other ones will be like, I don't understand what you're saying at all. And that's
right.
cool, and like, I mean, that's fine. But I went to a Kundalini class this past weekend and it was like, okay, this is similar to some of the things that I say, but he's using different words. And it was like, cool. This is really neat to see how you're saying it. And people are getting out of it something special for them, something
Right.
meaningful.
But it's going to speak to them. And I totally get what you're saying. I mean, and I
Yeah.
think that goes for not just yoga, so many different things
Oh, yeah.
where when you're ready to hear the message, you will. I mean, circling back to what you said, it's not real until it's real for you. When we have that
Yeah.
aha moment. And like somebody might even say, well, I've said that to you a million times.
Totally. And like, it might even be the exact same words,
Right.
right? But someone said the exact same words to you 7 times and it didn't hold any weight until the 7th time. And then something clicks and you're like, oh
Oh,
my God, I get it. And so we have these moments in our relationships with people, but then we have them with ourselves too. I mean, yoga asana is like the perfect example for me because I practice it so often. So there's so many times where like I've heard the same cue so many times. A teacher has said it so many times and it doesn't make sense until like the 3rd year
right.
of me hearing the person say it. And and all of a sudden something feels different. And usually as a result of getting it, something feels like less work. It feels more effortless.
Right.
I think when we try to force things, it feels like work. And that's something I've also learned through this work. And I got an injury as a result. I hurt my knee because I was trying to get into this fancy arm balance and I was so sure that I could do it. And I was like, yeah, I got to do it. And then I rotated my knee in a way that knees are not supposed to rotate. And yeah, I know. And I, couldn't really practice for several months. Like I could go to yoga, but it was a very different, like modified thing. And it was this deeply humbling experience. And then about 9 months later, I was in class and I felt open and warm. And then all of a sudden it was there and it was easeful and effortless. And it was like, whoa, this is what happens when you don't force things.
Right.
And it's so different. It wasn't this like every muscle in my body gripping to try and make this thing happen kind of experience. It was like still work. I'm still present and,
Right. Of course.
engaging, right? But it's not this, white knuckling experience.
Yeah,
and
you
so,
can't muscle your way into yoga poses. I mean, you can, but it's
right.
dangerous.
And it's just, yes, it's dangerous. But it's like, all aspects of our life, lives, when we try to force things, they usually feel forced.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know
Not
if
good.
that,
No, it
yeah,
totally makes sense. And I like not to get on the intuition train again, but I
yeah,
mean, this is connected to what you were talking about in your last show of just what you said now. If it feels forced, I mean, that
right,
is a sign something. It doesn't necessarily mean you're on totally the wrong path. Maybe the direction you're taking to get there is wrong.
right,
Like in your case, like, okay, I'm just going to force my body into this pose.
yeah,
Like, back up,
back up, yeah, and
and
also,
listen to your body. And yeah,
yeah, and there's no rush,
right,
like
right,
it doesn't matter if I do it today or if I never do it. There's that, but also learning not to rush has been like a really big thing for me because I think society teaches us that like to do a lot and be busy all the time, and
right.
most of us are really busy, and so I don't know. Sometimes it's okay to take child's pose.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So,
totally.
and I, have more than learned that because now I do it all the time and I'm totally happy about it. Whereas like when I was younger, I used to do all the vinyasas and all the chaturangas and,
And would
now
you
I don't.
say that's, I know. And I would think, and let me know if you agree, I would
Yeah,
say that's like the signature of a more advanced practitioner when they are,
totally. Right,
maybe they
right.
are in child's pose because they're listening to their body instead of,
Yeah, it's a sign
oh,
of
I need to get into
intelligence
that,
and
that
Yeah.
ridiculously crazy arm balance. There's nothing wrong with those either, but
And I
yeah.
think we all have to go through this learning process ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I remember hearing people talk about something like that and almost rolling my eyes at some of the things I've now said of like, oh, I skipped the vinyasas or,
Yeah.
and I literally was just like, oh, okay, I got it. Like you're taking care of yourself,
Da,
self-care,
da, da,
and it was like
da.
this,
Yeah.
yeah. And then it was like this, you know, realization on my own that like, holy shit, if I don't do this, like I'm going to, be super fatigued,
Right.
drain my adrenals, like on a very like physiological level, like I
Totally.
am
Yeah.
damaging
Yeah.
systems within myself. And so, but then on like an emotional level, it's like I don't have the capacity to show up for anything if I'm exhausted. And so, and that's not a sign of weakness, right? So it's actually a sign of strength. And so this whole thing flipped for me. And it's
Yeah.
still something I'm learning. I think I still sometimes will overextend myself and
Oh,
I
of
get to start
course.
over, right? So, but it's interesting.
But we bring more awareness to it. So
Yeah.
one of my favorite little, I don't know, quotes, who said it, slow down to speed up. I think it applies here
I love
sometimes.
it. Yeah.
And it really
Yeah.
does. It just step back and it'll let you see everything more clearly. And this goes for, I think, almost anything in life. Just slow down to speed up. Like then you nailed that pose when it was the time for you to
Right.
nail it, and it didn't feel so stressful.
Right.
So,
Not at all. It was
yeah.
actually like shocking how it wasn't stressful.
And you're like, well, I'm doing it.
What? I'm
Check it
doing it.
out.
How did this happen? Yeah. How did I get here?
Yeah, awesome. All right. Okay. So let's take what we've talked about here
Yeah.
and bring it onto the Instagram or
Yeah.
the social
Yeah.
media. But really, there is a lot of things to consider, when we're talking about yoga, when we're talking about yoga selfies, and I
Right.
know that's such a hot topic,
Mhm.
but, you and I were discussing last week, like there seems to be a lot of people make this dichotomy. Like it either has to be about looking good, looking kick-ass in your pose or having that amazing six pack because you're working your core so much,
Totally.
or it's all about how you feel and it's all about feeling better. And I for the life of me, I don't understand why it can't be both, right?
Right.
There
Right.
can't be elements to both. So yeah, let's just like dive into like that world then, I guess, in social media. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. I like to approach it like storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always been my whole life like really interested in aesthetics and I loved fashion for a long time and for the first 18, 19 years, even more 20 years of my life, that's what I thought I was going to do. And so I have always liked playing with how things look and color and lines, creating lines with the body, creating lines with patterns. These kind of things are really interesting to me. And so when I look at my Instagram, I'm conscious of these things, like how the photos look next to each other, how the colors look next to each other, all these things from a very like simple aesthetic perspective. I think it can be beautiful. And I like making things that are beautiful, whether it's beautiful shapes or beautiful food and like all this stuff. And so there's that element of like beauty on a very like aesthetic perspective. And then there's also the element of playfulness that I think is super important, and to be lighthearted and approach this platform with playfulness, because there is an element of having fun with it that I think is important. That doesn't mean to say that you can't post something that's serious, because I think there's plenty of times where that's appropriate and where that can have an impact. But for the most part, I like it to be not so serious, at least my relationship to it. That's, I think, the difference. The content itself might be serious, but my like attachment, non-attachment, that kind of stuff, how I relate to how it's being received, those kind of things can't have such, deep meaning to my self-worth or something like that. Like there needs
Right.
to be like, I am not that understanding of this is just me sharing, and however it's received is how it's received. So there's an element of the beauty, there's an element of the playfulness. And then there's intention, like what are you putting out there? What is the story you want to tell? And it's okay if it's not it's not every detail of your life, and that it's not the most, overall, or it's not the, truest representation of every aspect of who you are. This might just be a representation of what you choose to share. Or it is for sure a representation of what you choose to share, but it might just be that you're choosing to share one piece of who you are. And that's okay. You don't have to, I don't think we have to, as people, we're not required to, expose ourselves on every element, like that's not a requirement. And so understanding that, okay, I'm just showing my professional life. I'm just showing my yoga, or I'm just showing where I teach, or I'm just showing my, if someone's an artist, like this is just my art. I'm not telling you about my relationship with my sister. You know what I mean?
Right,
like there's,
right.
But it's intention. You're, consciously being aware of what you are choosing to share and what you are not. So there's a lot of things that can go into it. There is a fine line, right, of sharing and oversharing.
Yeah,
so
I was just going to say
all of these things are they're gray areas, right? So there is an art to sharing in a way that resonates. There is an art to sharing in a way that comes across as authentic. There is an art to all of it. There's an art to living. So the fact that some people are doing cool things on Instagram and some people are not is not surprising, because there are people in the world who are living lives that are really interesting and dynamic. And then other people that you're just like, what are you doing?
Right.
You know what I mean? So the fact that this is a microcosm of the macrocosm, right? So social media is just one little representation of this whole bigger thing. And so it's not surprising that there's this huge gradation, like this huge variation between how people are choosing to represent themselves.
Right, right. And we were talking about that fine line last week too. It's like there's between the narcissistic, like, hey, check me out,
Totally.
yoga pose, and, something that's truly intended, like going back to what you were saying about intention, to educate, to inspire.
Yeah.
And I would say to people that get really annoyed by it, this is my question too, though, is just unfollow. Like,
right.
Nobody's forcing your eyeballs onto these pictures.
Yeah. I mean, right.
So,
we get to choose who we put into our bubble, because
right.
let's be real, we're all in bubbles, but there is definitely we have our own agency. We get to choose.
Right.
And that's true on social media, but it's true outside of it too. We get to choose who we hang out with. We get to choose who our friends are and like who we build and maintain relationships with. So, and I know that these things can get tricky, right? Like you want to unfollow this person because you can't stand their posts or something, but it might be awkward because it'll hurt their feelings and stuff like that, or they might, they'll notice. And these kind of things definitely can be tricky, but that's like those instances are few and far between compared to the, like, are you choosing to follow all the like fit muscle, like inspiration people, and then you're getting annoyed that they're all doing squats and booty shorts,
right?
Or, you know what I mean? Or that you're like, oh, I like their smoothies. Right. But you just have to be discerning about like what you choose to follow. And so they can change. I unfollow the inspiration stuff sometimes all the time. I went through a wave right now. I'm in a wave of a lot of interior design because I just moved. So I have like, my feed is very similar. Actually, there's a lot of things that they all look the same, of like beautiful plants and shelves and, stuff like that, and cool Moroccan rugs.
Yeah.
But, and that's where I'm at right now. But there might be a time where I'm like, okay, I've seen enough of these rugs, and you know what I mean?
Right, right.
That's okay. But yeah, we get to choose, and we also, there's a whole other thing of like, we get to choose how much time we spend with our face in our screens. So, I think this is something I struggle with a lot because I work in this field. And so I wake up and I check my phone, I go to sleep and I'm checking my phone right before, but I'd like that to change. I don't know if it's really going to change But
Yeah.
you
We
know what I
need a
mean?
support group maybe for
Yeah.
that because I
And
feel the same way.
I'm like starting, I like the idea of like putting my phone away for like the last hour before I go to bed. And
Yeah.
these are things that are like, I'm thinking of now of like, what do I want to integrate? What practice, what ritual? Because there are plenty of times during the day where I do put my phone away, you know, whether I'm like, when I'm teaching, it's awesome. My phone's on airplane mode or,
Right.
you know what I mean? Stuff like that when I'm in class and everything. But when I'm with people, I like to put my phone away. But sometimes, you know, it's like, okay, I really do need to do this one thing. Sorry. And then I put it away, right? But these kind of things, I think, get to be a part of this whole social media conversation only because they are, sometimes it feels like it's taking over our world, but it's not.
Yeah.
So I think we have to remember that it's not. And so that's where that whole playfulness thing comes in of like, okay, this can still be light.
Right. But we're in the driver's seat. I think that's the important thing
Yeah.
to remember. It's so
Yeah.
easy to blame the technology or blame the platform or
Right.
blame what you're seeing, but we have to own that. We created it, right? We create whatever bubbles we're looking at. We were the artist of that, you know, or I mean collaborator of putting it all together. So
Right.
that's
And now that more and more people are bringing their businesses into these platforms, you know, like there's
right.
so many businesses that use social media and really rely on it for marketing and really rely on it, you know, to make money. And so that I get that it can be more serious and stuff like that, but you have to understand the platform itself and you
Yeah.
have to understand audiences and you have to understand who you're speaking to. It's like there's classes in colleges now, right, that just break this stuff down of, you know, there's this really famous, I think it was Oreo, when a couple of years back when the Super Bowl, it was on TV and the power went out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was Oreo or Nabisco, whatever. The company was like, it's never like you can still have an Oreo in the dark or something like that.
Right.
They tweeted that. And it was like, oh my God, they're geniuses. Like they're really using the platform the way it's meant to be used. And it's like been used as this example. I totally butchered whatever the tweet was, but it was like some witty thing. And that was the point that you can still eat a cookie. That's, I think, really is true, though. Like, we have to know Twitter is used in a different way than Instagram, and Instagram is used different than Facebook. And so you got to really get to know the platform you're on. And so when we talk about something like yoga selfies and like the narcissism that exists, it's an interesting thing because you know, for some people that might be their authentic self, and that's great. For me, I choose that kind of stuff does not appeal to me at all. I don't follow any of those people, and I try to stay away from that that world within Instagram to as much to like my greatest capacity or whatever, like to as much as I can. But to a certain extent, we're all going to see it still somewhere, and that's okay.
Right.
But I just choose not to engage with the platform in that way. And so, yeah, I think it's like what you said. It's like we are in the driver's seat, and we get to choose.
So yeah, so as a consumer, we're talking about we get to as a, you know, media consumer, we get to choose. What about, let's turn it to someone who does want to inspire and educate, let's say with their yoga selfies or their yoga lifestyle. But they don't want to come off as that person, you know. And I know we can't make every post perfect for everybody because everybody is different, and that's cool, you know. I mean, everybody shouldn't be following everybody else because it's going to appeal to different people,
right.
But what are some things? I mean, I know I'm thinking in my head, like, don't just necessarily, if you're coming obviously from a place of like, oh my God, I can't wait to blow everybody away with what I can do, you know. But what are some things to consider? Like, so you know, let's say you're a yoga instructor, or even just practitioner, you're incorporating this and you do want to inspire, you do want to educate, you want to do those things. What are some things to consider before you press post?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's about isolating a few different like umbrella pillars.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of different people that I've learned this from, whether it's just from like spending a lot of time looking at pages that I am inspired by and like, what are they doing? Why am I liking this? You know, like kind of asking like, what is it about this that's appealing to me? And like, why is this inspiring? You know, and these kind of questions are really good. And I've also like talked with other people who are really good at this and just, you know, as like consultants and be like, you know, like I want to learn from you, you know, and Rachel Garahan is someone, her handle is One Part Gypsy, and she's really wonderful at this. And this is like what she does. She teaches about, people how to like build brands and stuff like that. And this was like well into when I'd already like created my Instagram and everything. And I was already managing the Wanderlust one, but, it still was really helpful. And we talked about like identifying what it is in these different pillars, like what you want to represent. And so for me, and we did this for Wanderlust, but like for myself, when I look at what I'm posting, it's like, okay, it can be a yoga post, like my teaching, like my schedule, right? Like teaching in that realm. And then it could also be yoga and movement Pilates as like I'm offering a teaching through the post, right? So it might be like, oh, I'm going to talk about the heart meridian in this post. And then there's like, okay, me as a person and like my family, and there's a little bit of my personal life on it. There's travel when I'm traveling. And then there's healthful living, because that's a huge part of who I am and what I do. And so like there's food and stuff like that. But I've also, like my mom studies Ayurveda. We talk about Ayurveda a lot. So like there's that kind of stuff. And for the most part, I'd say that, or maybe puppies is probably its own category as well. But you know, like those are what's represented. And so there is a little bit of thought. I don't like it to be so, you know, calculated and meticulous, but there is a little bit of thought of like, okay, I'm not going to do like 4 food posts in a row. Right. Or I'm not going to do 7 yoga photos in a row. One, because I don't think it looks nice on the wall. And that's important to me. But also like, I want it to be interesting and varied and not, it's a funny thing because you want it to be recognizable of like, oh, that's a post by Justine without having to see my handle. But you also want it to be not all the same. Like, you know, so kind of thinking about like, well, what are you choosing to share? Like, do you want to only be, if you want to be super focused of like, I'm just a food blogger, cool, go for it. Dive in. And like, there's plenty of Instagrams that do super well with just pictures of amazing looking bowls, you know, like yummy bowls of like grains and greens and tofu and avocado and all the things. But you kind of have to set an intention, you know, and be like, what do I want to do? What do I want to create? But then on the other side, it's like, are you inspired? Are you like actually inspired by what you're putting out? And that's a whole other conversation of like, what do you do when you're stuck? And like, what do you do when you're not feeling inspired? And like, personally, I have like different things that I do, whether that's like going and taking a walk or, and I don't mean just like, I want to post something right now. I don't feel inspired. I'm going to take a walk. Not like that, but more like, like in our lives, if we feel inspired, we're going to be creating things that are more inspiring. I think they go hand in hand. One of my favorite things is, like all-time favorite things to read, and this is for anyone in the world, is David Foster Wallace's This Is Water. It's a 2005 Kenyan speech, and he gave it as a commencement speech to Kenyan College in 2005. And it's so beautiful and heartbreaking, and everyone should read it. But I've read it at least 10 times over the course of like the last 7 years, and I've sent it to a bunch of friends. It's like even last week, I sent it to my friend Audrey. I was like, you got to read this. You're not feeling inspired. Cool. Read this. And it's really interesting in that it talks about the mundane aspects of day-to-day life and how we're all like living through that. And for me, I think it's really beautiful, especially with social media, like to live the little things. And that's actually like a hashtag that does really well. Live the little things. I know, which is kind of funny. You can like look at like, what are other people sharing? But I choose to see, I think there's a lot of beauty in some of the little things, whether it's just like the plants, or if it's just, it could be anything. Like there could be anything that if you like photography, if you like taking photos, like you can make a post out of anything and tie it back into your greater thing. It could, like, I don't have for my yoga photos, like yoga focused content, I don't have to only take photos of yoga poses, right? It could be the blocks or the mat or it could be anything. If you make it look beautiful and if it's beautiful to you, cool, put it out there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it really makes sense. I especially what you said about, I'm paraphrasing here, but be inspired to inspire. Like, how do we ever think we're going to inspire somebody? It makes me think of something, one of my Facebook friends did a big old long post today about I used to be one of those guys that just threw around those motivational quotes with like a shark or a tiger or a lion on them or, whatever. And it's the easiest thing to do, just to like kind of copy and paste that stuff. But no, what are you sharing of yourself? And then I thought it was really hilarious because then he breaks down how like sharks aren't inspiring, they're just doing what they do. And lions are really lazy. It's really the lioness that goes out and does the hunt. And while he's like marking his territory and she's doing all the hard work. I mean, I'm getting off on a tangent on that, but be inspired. How on earth are you going to like be able to pass that on to others if it's just, I'm posting just to post. Let me just get this out here. So I was thinking about this morning before we had our call.
I am more interested in the content and the quality of the content than of how many people I'm reaching and how many followers I have. So I'm not necessarily the person to talk to about like, how do I build my audience? How do I like get a bajillion followers? It's like, well, there's certain things that I know, and like I've done really well with the Wanderlust one, and like it's more than doubled since I've taken over. But with my own, like that's not my not necessarily my only focus. I think it's really interesting that if the quality, like depending on what I put out, will affect how people engage with it, whether it's just liking it or if it's also commenting. And I think that's really interesting. There was a time, several years back where it almost felt weird if someone like made a comment in person, like in real life, based on something that you posted. Whereas like now it's not that weird. It's like, oh, I saw you put this thing out there, and like, it's like, I'm sharing this out there. So for me to think that people should not talk about it is not right. Like that's just not possible anymore. Right. Like they're not like stalking me. Right. There was like this idea before that, how did you know that I went there? It was like, well, you posted a photo, right? Like, but like if someone doesn't like the photo, I don't know that they've seen it, but that's not necessarily the case. Like there's plenty of people who see my photos who don't engage with them, which means that I don't know that they saw it, but they still saw it. And so, right. And which is a funny conundrum. So you might get, it's like an interesting thing of like someone making a comment to you in real life, like, at the studio being like, hey, I saw you went to eat here. And you're like, what? How did you know? Were you there? It's like, no, you posted a photo. But that it's interesting of like, hey, I saw that you put this photo out there. I ended up going to eat at whatever. And like, it's really good, and like that kind of like sharing is really cool. But especially if you put something out, cause you're like, this was so good. You got to check it out. And then it's like, people actually might go check it out.
Right.
Right. And so there is this element of sharing that's really great, I think, and
spilling over into the 3D world, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of talk and research about how like millennials and like even kids younger who like they only know how to engage in this way and they don't know how to make eye contact and like all this stuff, which I agree is horrible, like for people not to hold a conversation. I think we can all agree that we want people to be able to hold conversations, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible. It does not mean that it's impossible to have a healthy relationship with this stuff.
Right.
And I think it constantly needs to be a conversation. It's not something that you can just trust that will develop well. And there might be times when you're like, geez, I'm on this way too much. I need some time apart. Great. Good. Give yourself a detox, a social media detox. Cool. But it's like anything in our lives. You need to be aware of how you're engaging with it and just kind of checking in with yourself and being like, how's this feeling? Am I still feeling inspired? Am I feeling stuck? Why am I posting this? Just because I think I should be posting something. Like, I haven't posted a yoga photo in a while. Like, are people going to remember that I do yoga?
Right.
You know? Right. And there's like this anxiety element that comes into it. And it's like, well, that's probably not the best place to be posting from. And I can't say for certain, like, if I post from a place of, you know, oh my God, I really need to post something out there. Like, I haven't posted in a while. Like, maybe it's still well received, but it's different than like, I'm so excited to be teaching this class and I'm putting it out there. And like, that's where my intention I'm putting into it, you know, energetically. I think it has an impact, and I've experienced that for myself. So I don't know if that seems like woo woo and weird or not, but I think how we approach things affects how they're received.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know what? And as you were saying that, I was just going, this is exactly what you were talking about of how do I bring more awareness to the mind-body connection when I get on my yoga mat. Yeah. Right? It comes down to intention. Just sitting down is what is my intent for this? Right. So it does spilling off the mat onto the Instagram.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. Like, that connection, I think we really should draw that connection. I think is really important of like how we approach one aspect of our life can totally be how we approach another aspect, just because they're different. Like there will be different manifestations of how I approach my yoga practice versus how I approach my Instagram. But there are parallels, absolutely. And it's still me as a human. So how I'm in relationship with my movement and how I'm in relationship with my photos, I think I can learn from the two, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's this quote. Have you ever heard this quote? Like, I'm thinking, who has said this? How we do anything is how we do everything.
I love that. I have not heard that. But
I don't know who said it, so I apologize that I'm not giving you credit. But that just totally popped into my head as you were saying that. Like, that's a totally great example of it.
Yeah, you know, that I love that.
How we do anything is, we need to put it on a t-shirt.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, that's exactly what in the teacher training, the embodied flow one, when we talk about the microcosm is the macrocosm. Like, the little things are important. They represent so much. And so, yeah, I love that. I really do.
Oh, I love it too. Yeah. I do. It's a good reminder too. And it can be kind of like a gauge, like when things feel off track, like, well, how am I approaching pretty much everything I'm doing?
Yeah.
What am I bringing to the table?
That's one of the themes that I've worked with teaching a lot is like how we move is how we live. Yeah. So if you choose to move mindfully, we can choose to live mindfully. And so I think if you start practicing moving with grace, being really graceful, and like whatever that means to you, you know, whether that's fluid movement or embracing a softness, even in the strength, all of these things, it's like, well, can you do that when you're not moving? Like when you're just living?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And maybe you need more strength. Maybe you need more fire and you want to be more dynamic in your yoga practice. And then you want to be more dynamic in how you're approaching your career. All of these things, there are parallels.
Mm-hmm. Amen, sister.
Yeah.
Seriously. No, I hear you. Okay. Well, oh my gosh, we're coming up on an hour here.
Yeah.
I think we need to move into the rapid fire segment, right?
Oh my gosh, let's do it. Yeah.
Let's do it. Okay. We are just going to take a quick little break and we will be back for rapid fire. Badass Girls Unite. Want to be part of our inner circle? Head on over to ladyballsradio.com where you can join our VIP mailing list, check out the show notes for each episode, and access free bonus content. You can also head on over to our Facebook page, Lady Balls Radio, to join in the discussion, get updates on your favorite guests, and hear who's going to be on the show next. Okay, we are heading back to the show. And we are back with Justine Malick. Are you ready? Are you ready for the questions?
A little nervous, but I'm ready.
Don't be nervous. This is like so fun. The whole show's fun, but I love this part.
Yay. Okay.
All right. Okay. What's the title of your biography biopic? And feel free to include a long-ass subtitle.
Okay. Well, I think the just title would be Justine Ray, which is my name and middle name. And then the the subtitle could be Kapha Pitta, yoga teacher, Pilates instructor, Aries, maybe just Aries. Then that it ends.
Okay.
Kapha Pitta, yoga teacher, Pilates instructor, and Aries.
It just rolls off the tongue.
Does it?
No, I love that. That is so
Okay.
good. Okay, good one. All right, your favorite song to belt out at karaoke?
Oh, well, I don't really karaoke
Okay.
unless I'm in a big group. And
Alternate
possibly
universe. Justine.
alternate universe, and I'm often drunk. So I feel like Love Shack is always a great one. B-52s.
Okay.
Just a classic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Easy to follow. Good one. All right. We need to get like a party going somewhere where we do karaoke.
Yeah, there you go.
We'll see it. All right. Last thing that made you belly laugh.
I laugh a lot. I laugh all the time. I'm trying to think. Last week, I think it was last week, I went for a walk. I'm living right by the Silver Lake Reservoir, and I have this big thing of keys that I have like my little key pouch so I can put my ID in later and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm like, okay, we're going for a walk. Cool. I'm going to take my house key off and leave the whole thing of keys here. And I like put the thing of keys down, and then I'm going to leave the house, and I grab the thing of keys and I leave the house key and I locked myself out. And it was pretty funny. It was just like, as soon as I locked the door, I realized it. Thankfully, it wasn't like a whole massive, it took a few hours because I couldn't reach the manager, of the apartment building, but it was totally fine. It just was, it's good to laugh at yourself at how ridiculous that was.
I think that's almost like a rite of passage in a new place. Like
Right.
you've got to you don't really live there until you've locked yourself out at least once. It's like, all right.
At least once. Yeah. Oh my God.
Oh my gosh. That's too funny. That's too funny. Oh my gosh. Now I'm all paranoid. I'll be like, are my keys with me today? Because I don't want to be crawling through that window.
Bring all the keys. Yeah.
All right. Book you're currently loving.
Radical Healing by Rudolph Valentine is really good. It's like all about, that's like a serious book about like all the different practices, Western and Eastern medical practices, and how they can actually support each other really beautifully. I also have this like awesome coffee table book called Gypsy by Sibella Court. That's just beautiful. It's just every shot is just so inspiring and beautiful, and highly recommend both of those. Very different.
I'll have to check those out. Very cool. I like the difference. Like from serious to
just
aesthetic.
Like the different sides of my personality.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Your schedule suddenly opens up on a hectic day. How do you spend your time?
I like to be with my best friends. So anything with good people, it usually makes my heart happy. So I like to go to farmer's market if it's a day that's happening, and make a big like farmer's market salad all together, or go to the beach, have a picnic. Dream day.
Yeah, all good ones.
In that dream day, traffic does not exist, so you can do all of it.
Oh, cool. Maybe it's Coachella weekend, right?
There you go. And everyone's gone. Yeah.
That is such a magical time in Los Angeles, for those of you that don't know. Like, the Coachella weekends are like, you just want to go out and drive because you can. You can go anywhere. Good one. Good. Okay, speaking of farmers markets, what's your spirit vegetable?
Probably kale. And have you seen the kind that has, I forget what kind of kale it's called. It's like purple with the green on the edge.
Yeah.
It's like the baby kale, the like softer one. It's not the Russian kale. It's so beautiful, but it's like kind of like a surprise where it like looks like it's all the green, and then on the inside it's purple.
Ooh.
It's like a lavender purple. Yeah. So
I haven't eaten it, but does it retain the purpleness when you cook it?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Cool.
It's great.
Okay. On my list. Check in with 6-year-old Justine. What advice would she give you today?
Stay sassy.
Stay sassy. That's a t-shirt too.
I feel like I was much sassier as a kid than I am now, but I'm still pretty sassy. But I used to get in trouble for not watching what I would say.
Oh, that's stay sassy.
Yeah.
That's going to be next time I see you. Like, never change.
Yeah.
Stay sassy.
There we go.
Justine. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, this might be 6-year-old too, but I don't know. What's the ballsiest thing you've ever done?
Oh, I think that would have to be moving to Melbourne without knowing anyone.
Why? That's not that big of a deal. I don't understand.
Not that big of a deal, right? Didn't know anyone, didn't have a job, no place to live. But
oh my gosh.
And it turned out great.
That's so fantastic. You know what's really interesting to me, and I don't have like strict numbers on this.
Yeah.
But what you just said, not necessarily Melbourne, it could be, I'm thinking Joshua Tree was one, coming here to Los Angeles was another for one of our guests, but that is probably the most popular answer for this question is like, I just went and moved to XYZ, even though I didn't have, necessarily a safety net and had everything perfectly planned out, but I did it anyway because I was like being pulled there.
Yeah, I think that's the awesome, beautiful thing about intuition of like when we follow it and we truly feel aligned, it can be so beautiful. It can be so positive in a lot of different ways. And it can be really informative and educational in a lot of other ways,
Right.
That's so good. It could be anything, right? It could even be like moving across the city. It doesn't have to be, right? It could be anything. It could be changing careers, changing directions.
That's so fascinating. And I love one of our recent guests, Jen Whitney. She's the one who moved to Joshua Tree. She's got an incredible story. So make sure you guys listen to her episode as well. But it was very similar to you when you went to Australia in that she was like, okay, I can't remember what her time frame was, but I'm going to go there for a couple weeks. I just need to like chill out and I'm just going to check it out. And, I won't be here long. And then she's like, in her case, she ended up buying a house there. And but it's interesting how it blossoms into this huge thing. And I know now you forever have your Australia family that you'll be back to, and you were there for so long. So
Right.
Interesting. Listen to the voice. Oh my gosh. Okay, well that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Connie.
I don't want this to end. I'm like getting so much good stuff. But any parting words that you want to leave for our listeners on any of the topics we talked about?
Oh, that's a big one. I think one of my favorite, the first thing that's coming to mind, which I'll just say, is to be kind.
Yeah. That's huge.
And it's huge. I think the more we can bring that in to how we treat ourselves, how we treat each other and the world, the better. I think there is nothing too big about what we want. There's nothing that we don't have to limit ourselves. On the last day of the teacher training that I was in, we went around and like, what do we want? Like, why are we doing this? And Tara and Scott, who are the head of the trainings, and it's like, why did they put this school together? And it's like, well, they want to change the world, and it can be so, it sounds so almost crazy. Like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, I want to teach this and I want to facilitate this work and hope that it changes you a little and then you change someone. And it's like, we can make change and it doesn't have to be this thing that we shy away from, So I think being kind is a big one.
Yeah.
It's a huge one. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, that is like a lovely send-off for this. Also, where people can find you, JustineMalick.com, and your Instagram is also Justine Malick, correct?
Yeah, that is it.
Cool. And she does have a beautiful Instagram, guys. So check it out. All right. Well, thank you again, Justine. Thank you for both shows. Oh my gosh. So much great
welcome.
stuff.
Thank you.
So we're going to wrap it up for today, but listeners, stay sassy. You heard it here.
Yeah.
We will catch you on the next show.
Mm-hmm.